September 14, 1993. Inside a modest beige home on West Van Buren Street, the Luna family was beginning their day. Patricia Luna, 43, was tidying up the kitchen, humming softly to the radio as her 5-year-old son Damien played with his toy trucks near the table. Her teenage daughter Rochelle, 18, was upstairs getting ready for her college classes. The family's patriarch, Albert Sr., had already left for work early that morning. At 8:30 a.m., a stranger approached their front door. He carried a bouquet of artificial flowers in one hand. His name was Richard Kenneth Djerf, a 23-year-old man who once shared laughter and small talk with the Lunas' eldest son, Albert Jr., at their workplace. On the surface, there was nothing about Djerf that would raise suspicion. Clean-shaven, tall, polite, and articulate, he could pass as an ordinary deliveryman, maybe even a friend dropping by to visit. He rang the doorbell, waited a few seconds, then rang again. Patricia answered, her expression calm but cautious. The man at the door greeted her with what seemed to be a warm smile. "Morning, ma'am," he said politely. "I've got something for you." Patricia looked confused but polite. "For me?" she asked, stepping forward. The flowers were strange, plastic, a little dusty, but there was something disarming about the gesture. She didn't recognize the man right away, but before she could ask anything more, Djerf stepped forward, forcing his way inside. The door slammed shut behind him, and the world of the Luna family changed forever. Inside the house, the transformation from calm to chaos was instant. Djerf pulled a pistol from his waistband, a black 9mm Beretta, and ordered Patricia and her son into the living room. His voice was steady but cold. "Don't scream," he said, waving the gun toward her face. "You do exactly what I say, and nobody gets hurt." But the truth was, hurt was inevitable. He hadn't come there to scare them. He had come for vengeance. For months, Djerf had been nursing a grudge. He believed that Albert Luna Jr., the Luna's eldest son, had burglarized his apartment a few months earlier, stealing electronics, money, and his prized AK-47 rifle. Though he had filed a police report, the case went nowhere. The anger festered, turning into obsession. In Djerf's mind, Albert Jr. had destroyed his life, humiliated him, and made him a victim. He saw himself not as a criminal that day, but as an executioner delivering what he considered justice. Patricia tried to stay calm, clutching Damien's hand tightly. "Please," she whispered, "whatever you want, take it. Just don't hurt my son." But Djerf wasn't listening. He moved through the house with a predator's awareness, checking rooms, closing curtains, making sure no one could see in. He knew who lived there. He knew who would be home, and he knew exactly what he planned to do. He forced Patricia into the kitchen, ordering her to load electronics and valuables into his car, a dark blue Pontiac Firebird parked in the driveway. As she moved shakily, collecting items, Damien followed her, clutching her skirt, crying softly. By the time Rochelle came downstairs, she froze in shock at the sight before her. Her mother bound to a chair, her little brother sobbing beside her, and a strange man standing in their living room holding a gun. "Who are you?" she screamed, instinctively stepping back. Djerf turned toward her, his eyes locking onto hers with something between rage and hunger. "Your brother did something to me," he said. "Now I'm doing something to him." What followed was a scene of calculated cruelty. He forced Rochelle upstairs at gunpoint. The sound of her screams echoed through the house minutes later. The screams were replaced by silence. Rochelle was sexually assaulted and stabbed repeatedly. Downstairs, Patricia tried desperately to shield Damien's eyes, whispering prayers under her breath. But even as she prayed, the doorbell rang again. It was Albert Luna Sr. returning home early, unaware that his house had become a tomb. As he stepped inside, he saw Djerf standing in the hallway, gun in hand. For a brief second, the two men stared at each other, recognition flashing in Albert's eyes. "You," Albert muttered. "What the hell are you doing here?" The argument was brief but explosive. Albert lunged toward Djerf, but the younger man was faster. The gun fired. A single shot struck Albert in the chest. He fell backward against the wall, gasping, blood spreading across his shirt. Patricia screamed a sound of anguish so raw that neighbors later said they'd heard something that didn't sound human. But by the time anyone thought to call police, it was already too late. Djerf wasn't finished. He moved through the house with eerie precision, ensuring that no one survived. He shot Patricia at close range as she begged for her son's life, then turned the gun on 5-year-old Damien. When the child cried, "Please don't," Djerf hesitated for only a moment before pulling the trigger. When it was over, the smell of blood and gunpowder lingered in the air. The morning sunlight now looked harsh, cruel, cutting through the blinds like shards of glass. Djerf walked through the room slowly, his breathing heavy but steady. He poured gasoline on parts of the house, trying to set a fire that would erase what he had done. But the fire didn't catch fully, only leaving scorch marks and the stench of burnt fabric. He gathered some items, wiped his hands, and walked out the front door as calmly as if he were leaving a grocery store. Hours passed before anyone realized something was wrong. When Albert Luna Jr. returned home that evening, expecting to find his family, he instead found a nightmare. The smell hit him first: smoke, blood, something burnt. Then he saw the scene. His mother and father were slumped near the kitchen. Rochelle's body lay upstairs, the room in shambles. Damien's small body was found beside his mother's chair. In that instant, Albert Jr.'s screams shattered the silence of the neighborhood. The calls to 911 came flooding in, neighbors rushing out of their houses in disbelief. Police and emergency responders arrived within minutes, but there was nothing they could do. The Luna home had become a crime scene of unimaginable brutality. Officers who entered the house would later say it was one of the worst scenes they had ever witnessed. It was rage, one detective said. By nightfall, the once quiet street was crawling with police cars, investigators, and news crews. Yellow tape fluttered in the warm desert breeze. Flashbulbs lit up the dark as forensic teams entered the house, collecting evidence, photographing the carnage. The Luna family's lives had ended in a matter of hours, and now the investigation to find their killer had begun. But before they could even identify a suspect, rumors began to spread. Word of the crime rippled across Phoenix like wildfire. Who could do something like this? Was it random? Was it gang-related? People whispered theories, each one more horrific than the last. Parents locked their doors. Neighbors stopped talking to strangers. And in the midst of the chaos, one name quietly began to surface: Richard Djerf, the angry co-worker who'd been complaining for months that the Lunas had messed with him. As detectives pieced together the timeline, they discovered that Djerf had indeed filed a burglary complaint months earlier, naming none other than Albert Luna Jr. as a possible suspect. The case had gone cold. Djerf, it seemed, had taken matters into his own hands. Witnesses soon came forward, saying they'd seen his car parked near the Luna residence that morning. Others recalled that Djerf had been acting off in the days before the murders, agitated, paranoid, and muttering about revenge. That night, police executed a search warrant at Djerf's apartment. What they found inside confirmed their worst fears. Items belonging to the Luna's electronics, jewelry, and a few personal belongings were stacked neatly in boxes. Blood traces were found on clothing, and in his car, investigators discovered duct tape, rope, gloves, and a half-empty gas can. It was more than enough to connect him to the crime. Meanwhile, as police scrambled to locate him, Djerf was already on the run. He checked into a cheap motel under a false name, his hands still cut and bruised from the struggle. For a few days, he tried to act normal, eating at diners, talking to strangers, even joking with a bartender about the cops never catching him. But deep down, he knew the clock was ticking. When detectives finally caught up to him, they found a man almost eerily calm, sitting on the edge of a motel bed, watching TV. The remote was still in his hand when the SWAT team broke down the door. He didn't resist. He simply looked up and said, "Took you long enough." The arrest sent shockwaves through Phoenix. The name Richard Djerf became synonymous with evil, a man who had annihilated an entire family out of spite and self-righteous anger. Yet even as he sat in custody, Djerf showed no emotion. When asked why he did it, he shrugged and said, "They deserved it." For the investigators who had seen the horror inside that house, those words were almost harder to hear than the crime itself. There was no remorse, no panic, no regret, only cold certainty. It was as if, in his mind, the murders had balanced some cosmic scale that had been tilted against him. The Phoenix Police Department knew they were dealing with something more than a simple homicide. This was a calculated act of vengeance, a crime that blurred the line between madness and method. And as the investigation deepened, they began to realize that Richard Djerf's rage didn't erupt out of nowhere. It had been simmering for years, quietly feeding off rejection, humiliation, and resentment until it finally exploded in one catastrophic day. But for the Luna family, none of that mattered anymore. For lives were gone, a home was destroyed, Richard Kenneth Djerf was not the kind of man who drew attention. He lived quietly, worked late shifts, and kept to himself. To his co-workers, he was polite, sometimes even friendly, but always distant, as if he carried a shadow no one else could see. Yet behind his calm demeanor burned a resentment that had been festering for months, a bitterness that would one day erupt in unimaginable violence. Born in Phoenix in 1969, Djerf had grown up without major trouble, no violent record, no glaring signs of what was to come. But in his 20s, his life began to unravel. He rented a small apartment and worked at a local supermarket, where he met a young man named Albert Luna Jr. They bonded over shared shifts, and Djerf even invited Luna to his apartment several times. It was a casual friendship until everything fell apart. One afternoon, Djerf came home to find his apartment ransacked. His electronics, guns, and personal belongings were gone. He was furious. When he discovered that Luna Jr. might have been involved, rage consumed him. He filed a police report, but nothing came of it. Weeks turned into months, and the silence from authorities only deepened his obsession. To Djerf, this wasn't just theft, it was humiliation. He felt violated, powerless, and desperate to reclaim his sense of control. The betrayal haunted him. Each night, he replayed the break-in in his mind, convincing himself that Luna and his family had mocked him, stolen not just his possessions but his pride. The trial of Richard Kenneth Djerf began in 1995, 2 years after the massacre that shocked Phoenix. By then, his name had already become synonymous with horror. The evidence was overwhelming. Fingerprints, stolen items from the Luna home, and confessions he had casually shared with friends. The courtroom was packed, journalists, families, and onlookers all waiting to see the face of the man who had destroyed an entire family. When Djerf walked in, he looked strangely calm, dressed neatly, speaking softly. He showed none of the fury that had fueled his crime. To many, that composure was unsettling. It was as if he saw the proceedings as a mere formality. He didn't deny the murders. In fact, he pleaded guilty. But his plea wasn't born of regret. It was defiance, a declaration that he stood by what he had done. The prosecution presented the crime scene in painful detail. Photographs of the Luna home left jurors visibly shaken. Each count, kidnapping, rape, multiple murders, was a layer of brutality stacked on top of the next. When the judge read the charges aloud, the courtroom fell into an eerie silence. Djerf simply stared ahead, his expression unreadable. During sentencing, the judge described the murders as heinous, cruel, and depraved. The crimes involved a child, multiple victims, and acts of unspeakable violence. There was no question what the sentence would be. In 1996, Richard Djerf was formally sentenced to die by lethal injection. As the judge pronounced the sentence, Djerf didn't flinch. He simply nodded once, as though he had expected it all along. For the Luna family's surviving son, Albert Jr., the words brought a mixture of relief and unbearable sorrow. He had lost his entire family, and now the man responsible was bound for death row. On death row at Arizona State Prison Complex Amen, Djerf spent nearly 3 decades in isolation. Time moved differently. They're measured not by days, but by appeals, hearings, and quiet moments of reflection that led nowhere. In his cell, Djerf drew darkly humorous cartoons, wrote letters, and occasionally granted interviews. He told reporters he didn't want clemency, that he deserved to die. "If I can't find a reason to spare my life," he once wrote, "why should anyone else?" His final appeal was denied in 2025. The state set his execution date for October 17. As that day approached, the man who once believed vengeance would bring him peace faced the silence of his own ending. The justice he claimed to deliver had circled back to claim him in return.